Good evening, everyone. My name is Josephine Tucci, and I am the director of the Lincolnwood Library. Thank you so much for joining us this evening for Afghanistan Then and Now, which is a very important and timely topic. This program is co-sponsored by the Lincolnwood Multicultural Task Force. Before we get started, I'd like to share a few housekeeping topics. First, you'll be able to ask questions by raising your virtual hand, and we will call on you to speak. Or you can submit your questions or comments in the Q&A section found at the bottom of your screen, and we'll read them aloud. Second, this event will be recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel. Lastly, please remember that everyone is entitled to their own opinions, as long as they are sharing them respectfully to everyone in attendance. Please avoid speaking on behalf of others or making broad assumptions or generalizations about groups of people. And now on to tonight's conversation. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Mateo Mohammad Farzaneh. He taught World and Middle Eastern History at Santa Barbara City College and California State Fullerton before joining Northeastern Illinois University's History faculty in 2010. Dr. Farzaneh is the recipient of a number of prestigious awards and fellowships, and he has also shared his expertise numerous times on Chicago radio and television programs. He is fluent in Persian, English, Spanish, and Arabic, and he is the author of 2 books, including Iranian Women and Gender in the Iran-Iraq War, which is available here at Lincolnwood Library. Welcome, Dr. Farzaneh.
Thank you so much. You want to mute yourself. Thank you, Joe Tucci, for that introduction, and thank you, the Lincolnwood Multicultural Task Force and the Lincolnwood Public Library for organizing and hosting this event. It's my honor to be here today to provide this public service. Public service comes in many shapes and forms, and this certainly is one kind of it. I hope other professionals in our community come forward and offer their views and expertise to make our community more informed. Accordingly, I'm here as a historian, meaning I'm not here to make anyone feel good or bad about their national, religious, or ethnic identity, whatever that might be, or prove anyone to be right or wrong, whatever their political leanings. Rather, the goal of this event is to make, hopefully, everyone better aware of what's happened in the last 3 weeks, to be exact, in regards to Afghanistan, by looking at what took place in the last 20 years. I'm going to share a little PowerPoint with you all. Everybody can see the PowerPoint, I hope?
Yes.
All right. So for the next 10, 15 minutes or so, I will speak and bring you up to speed on Afghanistan. And then with the help of Joe and Chris, we will read your questions, comments, and I'll do my best to respond. And I hope I leave you with some food for thought on this beautiful Sunday evening here in Lincolnwood. So let's start with a map. Where is Afghanistan? Does everybody know? It's about 7,000 miles from Chicago. It's going to take you many hours to get there. And there are no direct flights to Kabul. So you have to go through a directing flight. As you can see, this is Europe, this is Africa, this is the Middle East, and this is where Afghanistan is. Afghanistan is landlocked. And with this map superimposed on the American eastern shore, so to speak, you can see the smaller states that would make up the size of Afghanistan. So it is landlocked, and we categorize it as being part of Central Asia or South Asia, depending on how we look at it from an academic perspective. It has the longest border with Pakistan, and in the order of descent, it goes from Pakistan, it has borders with Tajikistan, Iran, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and a few hundreds of miles of border with China through the mountains. Currently, the population stands around 37.5 million, 53% of which are between the ages of 15 and 54. So it's a young nation. The median age right now is 19. There are various ethnic groups within Afghanistan, mainly the Pashtun, Tajik, Hazara, Uzbek, and others. And I don't expect everybody to actually memorize all of this, but we're kind of providing this information to see the complexity of what we're dealing with here. There are two official languages of Islamic Republic of Afghanistan. One is Afghan Persian or Dari, and the other one is Pashto. There are other languages spoken as well. And the country is 99.7% Muslim. The last Jew that actually left Afghanistan left a few days ago, and that would be the end of Jewish presence in Afghanistan with the latest event. So very quickly, I'll go through some highlights of Afghanistan's history. Afghanistan, before it became a modern nation state, was part of the ancient Persian Empire to the west and the Indian Empire to the east. It was founded as a cohesive tribal confederation of some sort in 1747, so very close to our American Revolution and independence. Afghanistan acted as a buffer zone, and many people got hurt because of that, because they played a role in creating the zone between the Russian Empire and the British Empire that was colonizing India at the time, in mostly 1700s and 1800s. It gained independence in 1919 as a kingdom. So Afghanistan did have a king. It was a secular king, but Islam, of course, was the majority religion at that time as well. In the 1970s, it went through a coup and a counter coup. And by 1979, those of us who are old enough remember the Soviet invasion on the, I think it was the eve of Christmas Eve in 1979. The invasion and occupation of the Soviets lasted for 10 years. A civil war ensued due to the power vacuum that was left after the war from 1989 to 1996. The Taliban, that everybody is familiar with pretty much, came to power in 1996 to 2001. And then we had the tragic events of September 11th in 2001. We had the American invasion and occupation and reconstruction starting in 2001 till 2 weeks ago, or 3 weeks ago rather. We do have an Islamic Republic of Afghanistan now. That is the official name of the country. The elected government fell on August 15th. So today marks it exactly as 3 weeks. Taliban has created a provisional government as we speak. So when did Americans get involved? So everybody's familiar with the term the Cold War, and you can categorize the American involvement in Afghanistan as part of the Cold War. How so? So what happened was that in the 1980s, a congressman by the name of Charlie Wilson, a Democrat from Texas, came up with the idea in order to defeat the Soviets, they would engage and help and support the freedom fighters, Afghani freedom fighters. These are jihadi fighters, mind you, called the Mujahideen. And by the end of the occupation of the Soviets, the United States taxpayers basically paid about $2 billion, a little over $2 billion, in assisting the movement to help kick the Soviets out by way of the Afghan Mujahideen. The Afghan resistance movement, as it was called, was very effective, but it couldn't do anything without money, of course. And what happened was, with Charlie Wilson's getting the appropriations from the United States Congress, they were able to provide through Pakistan That was the traffic that they would go through to provide the arms and all sorts of weaponry to bring down choppers and aircrafts, Soviet aircrafts flying over Afghan airspace. It's important for everybody to know that the jihadists were not necessarily all from Afghanistan. This became an Islamic jihad of some sort, a holy war. And it did have people coming from Pakistan mainly, and Saudi Arabia, and other nations as well. The Soviets retreated in 1989. And as you probably know, by the 1990s, the Soviet Union crumbled and the wall fell. And the power struggle that I mentioned in the earlier slide allowed for various warlords, people that had been engaged in getting rid of the Soviets from Afghanistan. They started fighting each other. So the Northern Alliance, with the leadership of Ahmad Shah Massoud, that you probably heard in the news, or I've read somewhere, became the more secular freedom fighters, and the Taliban became enemies, bitter enemies. And the Taliban essentially won because they were getting more support from various sources that we can discuss in a bit. So we have September 11th and the Al-Qaeda terrorist attacks. This is the list of the terrorists, the hijackers of September 11th. There were 19 of them. Ironically, there was not a single one from Afghanistan. And 15 of them were from Saudi Arabia, 2 from United Arab Emirates, 1 from Egypt, and 1 from Lebanon. So that's an important fact to remember. The US responded simply because the Al-Qaeda, which was the terrorist organization led by Osama bin Laden, was fed and basically allowed to engage in terrorist activities and training on Afghan soil. Hence the United States war resolution that was passed in October 2001 that allowed for the rapid deployment and bombing first, and then rapid deployment of American armed forces into Afghanistan. A little later in December, we have the interim government that was put in place by the support of the US government, George W. Bush's administration at the time. The Taliban government collapsed a couple of days later, and the reconstruction of Afghanistan began, in which we spent somewhere around a little more than $2 trillion thus far. Along with human casualties, which I think are a lot more important than the money spent. This chart, I got it from the Brown University Watson Institute that keeps a very close tab on what's going on with American spending, taxpayer spending in way of the DoD, Department of Defense. And we have over 7,000 American men and women who perished in the war, who were killed after 9/11. 30,000 suicides related to the US service members and veterans, which normally are not counted as casualties because they don't happen in combat. And as you can see from this quote from the Watson Institute, United States has either spent or is obligated $8 trillion of taxpayers' money to help with the war, post 9/11 wars in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, and elsewhere. And if anybody's wondering what's happening in Pakistan, those are the operations that actually United States went after Osama bin Laden and the remnants of the Al-Qaeda group. Let's see. For some reason, I can't go forward. What's happened here? All right. So as of September 8th, last week, 4 days ago, we have a Taliban group that is the acting government in Afghanistan, because the original government that was put in to place with the help of the United States fell apart, and the country as a whole fell into the hands of the same group of people that we spent $2 trillion to get rid of. So the organization Taliban is identified as a terrorist organization till now. So what would happen with that identification, we don't know yet. The acting interior minister that was put into place, Sirajuddin Haqqani, is an FBI wanted man with a $10 million reward on his head, but he's now an official in the acting government of Afghanistan. The Taliban are extremely violent, especially against women. The level of tolerance is next to zero. They are ideologically and politically driven, and I put the two together simply because ideology can stay as an ideology if it's not politicized. So it is a politicized ideological movement with this very strange notion that they can bring back the glorious period of Islamic civilization. This source of ideology comes from Arabian Peninsula, which is today Saudi Arabia. There was no Saudi Arabia at that time in the 1700s. So the Wahhabi movement that some of you might be familiar with is the ideological engine that kind of drives the mentality of not only Al-Qaeda, but the Taliban as well. They are a Sunni revivalist movement, meaning Shiites do not participate in the Taliban movement. It's not saying that we don't have Shiites that identify with terroristic aims, but let's not confuse the two together. Osama bin Laden was a deep believer in the Wahhabi movement, and Al-Qaeda's objectives are based on that interpretation. And in the center of it, there's a great amount of anti-American sentiments, political anti-American sentiments that I'm sure it's going to come up in the Q&A. So what now? What's the future for Afghanistan and the United States? The first thing is that we don't know. the unknown element, we don't know how things are going to transpire. So we just have to wait and see. But it depends on the behavior of Taliban, whether or not they want to act as a prior state, which they did from 96 to 2001, or they want to be a legitimate government. It's hard to imagine how that would come about if they are not going to modify their ideology in some respects, because the economy for the past 20 years has been dependent on international monetary assistance, especially from the United States, but that's been cut off. So I don't know how they're going to run the government. So we just have to see if they're going to change their behavior. Since 3 weeks ago, there is no indication that they will, because there has been summary executions and beating of women and limiting the movement of women as well. So we just have to wait and see, because it also depends on how Pakistan is going to help with assisting the Taliban. The Taliban is a multinational, I would say, organization. So they have the Taliban of Pakistan, they have the Taliban of Afghanistan. For the longest time, this history goes back and it's hidden in the lines of historical texts and documents. If you search, Pakistan has had a very important role in allowing the Taliban of Afghanistan to train in their backyards with the aim of basically destabilizing Afghanistan, simply because at the time of the Soviet Union, they thought that if Afghanistan fell, Pakistan would be second in line. So that mentality starts from there. And then they can also allow the Taliban of Pakistan to kind of take their war somewhere else and not in the territories of Pakistan. So will Afghanistan allow training of terrorism and terrorists? We just have to wait and see. The Haqqani terrorist network that is among the most wanted by the FBI is a very dangerous group. They have killed American citizens and others. With the acting interior minister that is part of that terrorist organization, it's difficult to kind of imagine if terrorism is not going to be the future of Afghanistan and what will take place in their land. The anti-American sentiments will continue to rise as it has been for the past 40 some odd years. The most pertinent anti-American sentiments are developed right now because of the sudden pullout of the American forces, and everybody's seen the scene from the Kabul airport and how people were running after the airplane and hanging on to the airplane in order to get out of there, and the devastation that everybody experienced, and the 13 service people that actually died because of terrorist activities around the airport. So that sentiment is not going to lessen, it's going to increase. So if anybody's in the security services, I'm sure they're thinking about this, hopefully very seriously. What happens in Afghanistan spells out regional stability and instability, for that matter. If things work out for Afghanistan, then things can become stabilized. And I'm not too hopeful, unfortunately. I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but all evidence shows that we're not going into a bright spot. Actually, we're going into a very dark period, I think. And so you will see more regional instability because of that. I don't know if I kept my promise of 10, 15 minutes, but I can stop there and I'll stop sharing and take any questions you might have. Thank you.
It's at this time, if anyone has a question they would like to pose to Dr. Farzaneh or start a conversation about a topic related to this, now is your opportunity to do so. You can write it in the question and answer section on the at the bottom of your screen, or you can raise your hand if you would like to speak directly to the rest of the audience as well.
Was I that clear? Sorry. So Leah's asking, the news today portrayed things as getting better in the country. I would say don't believe everything that the media says. Of course, they're gonna give it a positive spin because, as I said, the other option is not very bright. So
we have a chat from Susan Ginsburg. Do you see it?
I see Bridget Scales in the chat. Why did the US decide now was the time to pull out? So I think if you've heard the president and other officials, they keep talking about the objective having been met. The objective for going to Afghanistan was to get rid of Al-Qaeda and people that perpetrated the terrorist attacks, the hijackings on September 11th, 20 years ago, and it was time to get out. We could never stay forever. So this was not something that you can actually pin on Joe Biden. This has been in the works for a long time. There was a strategy to leave, but it wasn't very much spelled out and the public wasn't made aware of it. But rationality dictates that once you start moving troops 7,000 miles away from home, they got to come back somehow in some way. So I'm not surprised that they're back, but what I would criticize the officials for is lack of foreseeing how things can transpire and how things can roll out. And I think some people might argue there is no better option. Well, the other option is to do enough good that nobody would want to hate Americans, so they would attack us. But that's a very academic and liberal perspective, and I'm not sure if it has a lot of bias. Should I keep reading?
Sure.
Mark Skipworth says, if the Taliban is a Sunni organization, what is the breakdown between Sunni and Shia in Afghanistan? Does the Taliban persecute Shia? Good question, Mark. The majority of the Afghan population is Sunni devout. There is a minority Shiite population that mostly in Herat, in the western region. They are persecuted during the time of the official government for the past 20 years, Iranian Shias, because Iran is by majority Shiite state. So the consulate section in Herat was attacked several years ago, and I don't know, about 9 diplomats were actually beheaded inside the consulate by the Taliban. So there is no love. However, Iran and a bunch of other countries close to Afghanistan are supporting what's happening right now in Afghanistan. I don't know if that answers your question, but Vanessa is asking, I saw in the news today, women protesting in support of Taliban. Is this a small minority? Extremely small. They probably got paid for it, I would venture to say. I cannot imagine anyone that enjoys being a human being would support the idea of beating women constantly and not allowing them to leave their homes or participating in the affairs of the society. So I wouldn't take too much sort of heed in that. Arnold is asking, okay, so, much does, it went away.
I think it's how much.
How much Afghanistan depends on foreign assistance to maintain their government in the future? They're gonna have to depend a lot on foreign assistance. However, I should also mention this, that from 96 to 2001, when they were in power, of course, Afghanistan didn't develop and didn't go anywhere as far as progress was concerned. However, with the help of the Pakistani assistance and drug lords and traffickers, an extreme amount of heroin was shipped out, and that was basically the main source of income. And this is a heroin that actually goes to Europe, mostly for consumption in Europe. So it does have a market, so they could definitely go back to that. And also there is other items that they could smuggle to sustain themselves, but the money is not nearly as much as it was when Americans were supporting the government there. Do all Afghans feel that the Taliban rule is best? That's a good question, Jesse. There is a school of thought right now saying that if people are okay with the rule of Taliban, then what are we to say, right? And that's very rational. However, we don't know if the people are okay with the rule of Taliban. And this actually comes out of Washington as well, which I think it's very, very unfair and unfortunate that they say that, because they keep saying if the Afghan government that the Americans helped put in place and armed and all of that stuff, if they really cared to fight the Taliban, they could have, but they didn't. So that school of thought is still out there thinking as to how to answer that question. My answer would be, I think the overwhelming majority of the defense people in Afghanistan knew that without the agreement that the Trump administration went into with the Taliban, there would be any other way that they could fight the Taliban. For those of you who don't know, from the time of, I think, the Obama administration, then on to the Trump administration, there's been contact with the Taliban, trying to see how they can bring them to the table. And everything was finalized last year, if I remember, in February of last year, or maybe this year. Last year, the year before that, that they signed an agreement with the American government that they would be working hand in hand with the sitting government. However, that didn't work out very well, because one of the things that they had asked for was the release of the terrorists in jails, which the government did not want to do. But they did release some of the other prisoners that had engaged in terroristic activities before. So things kind of got muddied there. But as far as Afghans want to have Taliban, I've never been to Afghanistan, so I don't want to say, oh yes, absolutely yes, or absolutely no, I don't know. But from all things that we're seeing and all the news that's coming out, not just from one source, from multiple sources, and if you read local languages also, you do see that people are extremely, extremely scared and dissatisfied and unhappy with the situation right now. Will women continue to be allowed to be educated? That remains to be seen. I think the universities already they announced that women cannot come to continue their education. So I don't know what would happen for secondary education, so to speak. That remains to be seen. That's part of the unknown. Marlene is asking, how safe are the Christians? Do you think there are more than 100 Americans in Afghanistan? Do you think that we will have all who want to return will return? Well, I read something actually this morning that said not everybody that was given a safe passage to leave wanted to leave, and these are some of the Americans. So there will be some Americans that want to stay and help. I don't know. That's a short question. And will the Christians be safe? Generally, people that do not abide by the ideological sort of understanding of Islam that the Taliban have, they're not safe. So whether they will thrive, probably not. Are the journalists safe? Definitely not. I've been listening to quite a bit of journalist stories, people that get on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter, and they're saying exactly what's going on. They're getting beaten. They're getting punished. Are they being imprisoned? If they're imprisoned, we don't know because they wouldn't be able to tweet. So we don't know about that. Charles is asking, you spoke about Pakistan, but where do the other border countries stand with regard of belief on religion, political, and general ideas? Basically, who is more in line with Afghanistan? So, because as I explained, because the Taliban is a Sunni group predominantly, doesn't have Shiites in it that we know of, and because Wahhabism that was created in Arabia in the 18th century, because it's a revivalist Sunni movement, ideologically, it does not. Again, ideologically, it does not bode well with Iran. However, politically, it does bode well with Iran because Iran is very happy that the Americans basically left, right? Whether or not there was a backroom deal between the Iran nuclear negotiations that was taking place at the time, or lack thereof, and the Taliban, maybe they exchanged tits for tats. If Iran would support the Taliban, maybe the United States wouldn't go as far as pushing Iran into doing things that it didn't want it to do. We would probably know in about 20, 30 years. We wouldn't know it right now. The prediction of what the future of Afghanistan might be, would there be another civil war? I would bet my money on that there will be a civil war unless the Taliban becomes aware that the civil war is not going to get them anywhere. A group of warlords are going to make extreme amount of money, but the people are going to be miserable. So did the 20 years that they were in hiding, and in Pakistan mostly, or in Qatar, was it a time for them to reflect, to kind of think that they can't be an Islamic republic like other Islamic republics, however vile or dissatisfied that people might be? That remains to be seen. So my prediction is not very positive, unfortunately. Not a question, a comment. Thank you for taking time. Thank you, Aline, Marcy. Is there any hope for the women who were starting to see some freedoms and education under the Taliban? I highly doubt it. Short answer. I really doubt it, because I mean, if you go and look at the ideology again, you do notice that their interpretation of what a good Islamic society does is to keep women indoors, not get them involved for a variety of reasons, because they believe women don't have the knack, the capacity, the faculty to decide like men do. So it's an extremely misogynistic sort of understanding of women's role. Was anything accomplished in the last 20 years? Oh man, that's a very difficult question to answer. I always like to look at the positive side of things because I'm a teacher. So as gloomy as I might have sounded, in my opening introductions. I do believe that for 20 years, United States essentially sowed the seeds of education, especially for women, and hope. Afghanistan, if you know, Afghanistan did have a all-women robotics team that won international awards, and they were able to get out and fly, I think, into United Arab Emirates or Qatar. So the seeds of change have been sown. If anybody's going to allow those seeds to actually grow further by giving them, piecemeal freedom, it could lead to something. It's extremely difficult right now, sitting here on September 12th of 2021, with all of these terrible things that's been happening in Afghanistan, to kind of think. But I think for the sanity of everybody, it's better to think, and say, yes, Afghans have experienced this idea of participatory democracy, voting. Women have done the same thing. So I'm hopeful in that area. Francisco is asking, in your opinion, how long will the dark period last? It all depends. I mean, if there is anyone smart in the Taliban group, things can hopefully become better for the sake of the Afghan people, but I'm just not sure. I can't say. Shara is asking, what do you think the US could have done better to avoid this unfortunate conclusion? That's a good question. The US could have addressed and some of it is cultural too, because corruption is extremely ingrained in the culture of Afghanistan for the reasons that we've discussed. If the United States had concentrated more in building the nation through education. I'm an educator, so I go back to education and stress education, and kind of address and push the governments. The US ambassador could have done this very easily to stop the flow of corruption that didn't allow the money and assistance that was going in to go to the average person. If, for example, somebody had supported the idea of building factories and manufacturing stuff, it sounds very naive, but I don't think it is. It could have led to somewhere. A people group that have good economy and a way of making money, they're not crazy to strap themselves with bombs or want to kill other people. So I extremely do believe that part of it could have been an economic sort of building, which was not done.
Mateo, there was one question that I think we accidentally skipped. It's from Charles. He says, can you dive deeper into the slide regarding the 7,000 plus deaths versus the 30,000 plus suicide?
Sure,
This number was a total eye opener.
Okay. Let me go back to that. I'm glad people are paying attention. So this is the slide Charles is talking about. So basically, as whoever has served in the services, armed services, knows that combat has certain amount of post-combat wounds, psychological wounds, wounds that are not seen. And servicemen and women bring these wounds with them when they come back from combat. It doesn't matter where they're coming from. It could be the Korean War 50 some odd years ago, 60 years ago. It could be the Vietnam, and definitely Afghanistan and Iraq. So what Watson, I think, has done is to look at the number of suicides, successful suicides, that had taken place by service people actually taking their lives because of the PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And that number comes from there. So they're kind of connecting the dots that the DOD is not saying that we had, because the true number would be if you add 30,177 plus 7,057, you get almost 37,000 some odd hundred people that were killed in Afghanistan. But because they were not, they didn't die in combat, they kind of separate the two. It's technical, but at the same time, psychologically, it doesn't give the notion that we're losing men and women that are in the service of the armed services. I don't know if that answers your question or not. All right. Where were we?
Sharara.
I think I answered that.
Okay.
Jan Paulson.
Yeah.
So, since so much of the country is young and never experienced life under the Taliban, what are your predictions about their adjustments, especially women musicians? That's a very good question, Jan. It's going to be horrendous. I've been listening to people that can't get their voice out, mainly through BBC Persian and other venues, and they're horrified. But the naivete of the young people is showing itself simply when they do state that they're going to fight this, they're going to stand against the Taliban. And there was a protest, women that did not wear the burqa, the whole head to toe preferred hijab that the Taliban wants all the women to wear, and they came out and they got beaten. So I think you're going to have several episodes like this. And usually if people don't go all the way to get what they want, they're going to be, stuck in their home, and they're going to have to wait to see what happens. So their lives would be wasted, essentially. That's what happened before. And I don't see it not happening again. It's very, very possible. Again, I don't want to be too gloomy because, again, for 20 years, like Jan is saying, they've experienced education, they've experienced music, they've experienced life, the simplest things that we take for granted here, going to get a manicure, pedicure, to go to a hair salon, to get your hair done. Those things were luxuries that were afforded to people, and freedoms that were afforded to Afghan women that everybody was pretty much very happy about. The women who don't want to go to those places, they continue not to go, and that's not going to make a difference. But because of the 19 years of age as the median age, and because over 53 people are very, very young, it's going to be a horrendous experience for them unless something else happens. Merle is asking, are there other countries beside the US who might consider investing in Afghanistan for positive measures? Right now, we just have to wait and see, because we don't know how the Taliban are going to be treating women, which I think should be one of the major things for anyone. If I were a country and I wanted to invest, or if I was an organization and I wanted to help with the economic development of Afghanistan, that's the first thing I would consider, the kind of freedom that the women would have. So I hope other companies would do that, or other countries would do that. However, again, I don't want to sound naive, because politics sometimes has nothing to do with how nice you want to be and about your ideals. So I could be totally wrong there. You stated the anti-American sentiments is because of the sudden withdrawal of troops. Didn't they know that the agreement was made? Yes, they did know to a certain extent that Americans will withdraw, but they didn't know that the Afghan Defense Forces would not stand against the Taliban. Now, one thing that I think it's good for everybody to ask themselves is, how does Taliban get all the money to buy guns and to attack? And the same question can be asked, how did ISIS do that, ISIS? Where did they get all the trucks from, all these branded trucks? Where did they get all these machine guns? Where did they get all these weaponry? So there is a flow of money that's coming from somewhere. And I'll be very, very surprised if the United States government doesn't know about that, but maybe we shouldn't know about that. Maybe that's one of those things that we're not privy to and will remain not privy to it. So I think if I was working as a defense person in Afghanistan where the Taliban came knocking, and I knew that the Americans have made peace with them and had allowed them to participate in the government, then I wouldn't fight them either. I would foresee that fighting them would mean being killed. So I can't blame the people that didn't fight against them. And that's one thing that I think was very unfair for President Biden to say about the Afghan security forces. Is there any knowledge of how widespread the Taliban is geographically? They're all over the place. They've got the whole country down. They started from Kandahar, I think, a few months ago. And when I was listening to the news, nobody was really paying attention, especially in spring and early summer. things were just falling one after another, bits and pieces. It just got really, really crazy by June and July, and things just went out of control. And the writing was on the wall. Everybody knew that this thing's gonna lead to nowhere. And I remember on the 14th of August, I was at an airport flying back to Chicago, and a friend of mine called me and said, "So what do you think is going to happen?" I said, "Pretty soon you're going to have Kabul in the hands of Taliban." And he started laughing. He's like, "Oh, you don't know anything. Wait, see what happens. They're going to fight it." And that's exactly what happened, actually. Kabul did fall in less than 24 hours. So again, you have to think realistically about these things and rationally, and what does a sound mind do in light of somebody holding a gun in your face, let's see. John Baker, was anything positive accomplished during the, I think I answered that. Let's see, 1,000 years of, you deleted it, Chris, sorry. I was going to read the rest, that's okay. It's all right. Christine Halverson is asking, is it possible that people tired of the Taliban could organize and revolt? There is a movement, if you haven't followed the news, there is a region called Panjshir in northeastern region of Afghanistan. It's a valley, it's extremely difficult to penetrate. However, the organization that's fighting against the Taliban is being also fought with the help of the Pakistanis. Pakistanis did drive or fly drones and bombarded and identified positions of the resistance movement, so to speak, the leftover from those days, the enemies of the Taliban. So even if the Afghans want to do it, I don't know if the powers would allow that to happen for a variety of reasons. Let's see.
One of the questions was from John. He wanted to know, why is it that after 1,000 years of independence, almost the entire country is illiterate?
1,000 years or 100 years? 100 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. Corruption, cultural backwardness, lack of opportunity. That happens in other places in the world where men, again, because I just wrote a book about women and gender, so I tend to kind of blame men pretty much for everything. And because they're the war makers and they make the decisions and they manage or mismanage wars, and they do the same thing when it comes to politics. So when you don't have the participation of the whole population, this is what you're going to get. When half of the population, which is women, is not participating in it, then it is no surprise that you don't get, the girls don't get the chance to educate themselves. So I would say part of it is cultural, part of it is political, part of it is just pure ignorance too, and misogyny, of course. Is it possible? Okay, I read Halverson's. Let's see. What do you think gets overlooked when we talk about the situation of Afghan women and girls? I don't think anything gets overlooked, but because we're so desensitized to all of this stuff, unfortunately, it becomes normal. There's nothing normal, when a young woman is getting beaten by, a 50, 60-year-old man. There's no normalization in seeing girls, as young as 9, being forcefully married to men, or in the case of ISIS, in Iraq and Syria, being group raped and all that. So, but unfortunately, with our own culture that somewhat normalizes it in the field of entertainment, especially, and I'm very critical of that, that normalcy leads to kind of saying, okay, I've heard that. And because it's such a horrendous thing, I think people tend to kind of tune out of it as well. Would you speak about Ahmed Shah Massoud, who was assassinated while Al-Qaeda? Yeah, I mean, Ahmed Shah Massoud was the leader of the Northern Alliance, the Hazara, that their base was in Panjshir that I just mentioned. He was killed, and if you listen to some documentaries about September 11th, the chatter that the Russians had picked up on 2001 was that the Russians knew by the assassination of Massoud, the Taliban are engaging into something really sinister, and whether or not they knew exactly what was to take shape in that morning of 9/11. Remains to be seen. But his son now, Ahmed Massoud, he's in his 30s, I believe, is saying that he's going to fight all the way to the end. But his companions and people that help him have been killed so far in Panjshir. Is he the only hope of Afghanistan? I always say, for every good and for every bad person, there is, a bunch waiting in the wings to do the same thing. So Afghanistan just doesn't have the Massoud family. They have others, I'm sure. And I give them, the credit and hope that they will rise against what's happening.
Mateo, we have a visitor here, Mr. John Baker, who has raised his hand. So I'm going to go ahead and
Sure.
I'm going to mute so
we don't get echoes.
And now if you unmute yourself, Mr. Baker, you should be able to speak.
Excuse me, I didn't raise my hand unless I punched the wrong button on my computer. So I will leave the floor to someone else. Thank you.
Okay, thank
Okay, let's go back to the questions. The Haqqani Network, I think you want to mute yourself. So there are several terrorist networks. Again, the easiest thing for everybody to understand is because Afghanistan is mainly a tribal society and tribal confederations are extremely important. Within these tribal organizations, there are warlords that actually break away from the tribe sometimes, and sometimes they come back to the tribe to get their support. And that's a very common thing with tribal formations and tribal identity. The Haqqani Network gets an extreme amount of support from Pakistan, and the network over there had been working for some time. What I question, and I think it's good to kind of ask that question, it's a fair question, is that for 20 years, the Taliban was in the hiding and fighting back. And the great majority of them were in the countries that we knew where they were. Why didn't we go after them? Or why didn't we allow or ask countries such as Pakistan and Qatar to hand them over? Or because we've done that with the Al-Qaeda network. And I don't want to guess anything, but I think that would be a very valid question to ask. Why do we let terrorists that we know where they live to roam around freely, to come back now, and this guy, the Sirajuddin Haqqani, become the acting interior minister? I don't know if we're going to get an answer for it, but I think it's a valid question. It's not the Haqqani network that does a lot of bad things. There are other networks as well. But what's relevant here is to know that they get support from a variety of organizations, especially within dark organizations and dark networks that we're not privy to know, and I certainly don't know it. How much leverage does the US have with regard to Afghan assets held in the US? Probably not much. I mean, I think there's been 1 or 2 drone operations, attacks against Taliban since 3 weeks ago. And I think that's something that I hear and I read by the officials, that they have that as a way to respond if there is anything in way of threatening US assets in Afghanistan. So I think the only thing we can really do, we can't send in boots on the ground. I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. Will it ever? I don't know. But the drones are always an option. They've been an option for a long time. What countries are pleased that the Taliban is in power? I think we answered that question. People that think the existence of American forces close to them was too much. So Iran definitely would be happy. Pakistan would be happy. And those are the 2 major ones, I would say. China is already thinking about, where did they go? About investing. Of course, I mean, That's China. China has its own Uyghur Muslim population issue right now, as you probably know, in Shaanxi, in province in China. So by helping the Taliban, the pressure to give more human rights to the Uyghurs of China could probably go away, and they would be pleased with that. No surprises there. What can we as individuals do to help? So at the end of the day, we all are very proud to be Americans, and we participate in a participatory democracy, which is a wonderful thing. So I think the people that make decisions are the ones that we should be held accountable. Congress people, representatives, senators, people that actually get elected. I think that's our only venue to go to and to ask them to not make hasty decisions. Again, Charlie Wilson, I extremely urge you to watch the Charlie Wilson War. I don't know if you've seen it or not, with Tom Hanks. It's very close to historically very accurate. So people that actually get elected and they sit on foreign relations committees, in defense committees, some of them have absolutely no idea of these places that they're making decisions on. And that's a very scary thing. But that also, as an elected board member or an appointed board member, I can see how, when I don't know things about the organization that I'm part of as a board member, how things can get confusing. So it takes the elected members hard work to read everything that they're handed and do a little bit of research themselves. And I think Washington kind of works as a group of people that want to think alike in the time that things are really, really ugly. So I could understand on September 11th how everybody felt when the Congress went back into session, I think a week or two after, and decided to do this. So again, I always say in my classes, we don't know how we would react if we were in somebody else's position, but I think by going to the person that you actually elected or representing your district, I think that's a great way to start putting pressure on people to be more responsible when they do things. Charles is asking, can you provide a few objective sources for daily or weekly information as to the happenings or what's taking place? I mean, the places that I go to, because I read the foreign languages that's required for Afghanistan, so I'm privy to that. For people that are not familiar with Dari or any other dialects in Afghanistan, the more reliable sources would be probably National Public Radio, NPR, WBEZ, that unfortunately doesn't do a lot of international things. So you would listen to the national broadcasts, and also Democracy Now! With Amy Goodman. There's a lot of good things that you can listen to. Again, some of those organizations, especially with Democracy Now! With Amy Goodman, it's characterized as being extremely liberal and to the left. I don't care about that. I want to hear the news. I listen to the analysis of the news, but because I do a little bit of analysis myself, I kind of leave theirs out and just look at the facts and what they're reporting, and that's very, very helpful. And BBC also tends to be fair sometimes, but Al Jazeera is on the side, apparently on the side of the Taliban. So things that are coming out of the Al Jazeera network, it's kind of giving it a positive spin, unfortunately.
There's a few questions in the chat here. Is it possible that people tired of the Taliban could organize and revolt, or is the widespread use of violence too overpowering?
I think we discussed that. They could organize. Again, the positive side of it is that for 20 years, United States helped the Afghan people to create institutions and believe in institutions that we hold dear and near here in the United States. So it is possible that those things will pay off in due time. Whether it's going to be right now at this minute, I don't know. Again, don't dismiss the fact that Taliban needs to behave in ways to not be treated as a pariah state. And that remains to be seen also.
We have another question here. How can you explain the complete folding of the Afghan military forces?
I think I can't fully explain because I don't know all the facts, right? Some of this stuff is held as secrets still, and we might not know for 20, 30, 40 years from now. My understanding is that when the negotiations between the Taliban and the United States began, I think 10 years after September 11, so by 2011, 2012, if I'm not mistaken, and other nations were involved as well. The issue was that they realized, the foreign powers realized, that without satisfying the Taliban, somehow, they're not going to have total peace in Afghanistan, and Afghanistan cannot be for everybody, right? And so they started talking to them, and I think by the time the Trump administration came into office and started talking to them, I think they kind of pushed this agenda a little too quickly and allowed for the Taliban, or forced the Taliban on the government in Kabul. And Abdullah, who was the CEO of the government, and President Ghani, the executive of the government, in the executive branch, they both stated very openly that they cannot make peace with the Taliban simply because of their ideological stance. And in some ways, in the sidelines, they mentioned the idea of the politicization of what the Taliban has been doing for some time now, with the support of Pakistan and other nations. And but those voices got ignored. And I think why Ghani, fled in the middle of the night, it's very clear. They did that because they knew the Taliban has a green light from the United States to go in and to take it over. Now, this might be a very bitter pill for a lot of people to swallow, but our government has done things like that, to sleep with the terrorists at one point or another. And that's a very difficult thing for especially if you're a patriot, to kind of appreciate, but that has happened before. Somebody is a freedom fighter today, the next day they're going to be the terrorist, or vice versa. It's a national interest that always comes to be played. And I'm not sure when people are talking about national interest is my interest or yours. I think it's an interest of a very specific group of people with an extreme, and I'm not talking about any ethnic or religious groups. I'm talking about mostly corporations. The $2 trillion that was spent in Afghanistan, only 5 companies really benefited from it. So unless you were a stockholder in those companies, or you work for those companies, and you made things that were actually spent and used in Afghanistan, I didn't benefit from it. And I'm not sure if the people that are listening to this broadcast actually benefited from it. So it gets more complicated than that. It's not like we can say, okay, here's what we know, and here's the truth. The truth lies still in the letters and in the memos that we don't see. And I don't want to guess, but if history is any indication, that's how the United States foreign policy has always acted. It's been extremely short-sighted.
How are the U.S. and Europe handling immigration from Afghanistan?
Well, Afghans, like everybody else during the Syrian upheaval and the war that was going on in Syria and Iraq because of ISIS, were among people that were making it across the agency into Greece and onto various places, into France, across the English Channel. So right now, there is not a lot of movement, simply because people are scared to, make a dash to the border. During the previous official government, it was easier to get across or get a passport and fly to a third country without a visa, and then, make your way in. And the easiest route would probably be Iran. So they would go through Iran, and from there they would go into either Turkey or Iraq, and through the mountains, they would make it with a bunch of other people to the western shores of Turkey.
One question. Where? This one?
The Q&A, yes.
Yes.
I
So
can read it. You want to read it?
Oh, no,
That's
go
okay.
right ahead.
U.S. last drone strike did not hit a car full of bombs, but plastic water jugs, per Wall Street Journal reporting. by watching surveillance footage, US may think twice about drones because of this 10 killed, including local Afghan aid workers. Absolutely right, Jan. Actually, I think the children were all from one family that died, and I saw the report on that. So drones are not the most exact things to do. Somebody sitting somewhere in the Mojave Desert near Las Vegas, and they have this stick in their hand, and that by itself is quite interesting in various ways. So, but I think that's the way we've been doing drone wars for a long time now, and it's part of the DoD's sort of way in lieu of not having boots on the ground. Drones are the only thing, but I do agree with you that they're not always exact, and they do kill innocent people. You're welcome, Bridget. You're welcome, Charles. You're welcome, Mary.
So it looks like we've gotten through everyone's questions or comments. If anyone has any last thing they would like
Your
to.
camera's off, Joseph.
Oh, sorry. Camera. It looks like we have answered all of the questions that came in through the chat and the Q&A. Unless anyone else has something they would like to discuss at this time, then we will wrap things up.
You're welcome, Christina.
Yeah.
Susan.
Lots of thank yous. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us this evening. Thank you, Dr. Farzaneh, for your expertise and for sharing this with us and discussing this. Let's keep the conversation going over the coming months and years, and keep our eyes on what's happening in the world. Thank you, everyone, and we hope you have a wonderful evening and a great week.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.